Sarah Mitchell had been a forest ranger for 7 years. She knew every trail, every hidden path, and every dangerous spot in the Blackwood National Forest. On this cold November morning, she set out alone to check the northern boundary fence. Dark clouds gathered overhead as she walked through the dense pine trees. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds sang, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sarah felt uneasy, but pushed forward. She had a job to do. The fence near the old ravine needed inspection after last week's storm had damaged several sections. As she approached the ravine, Sarah noticed fresh tracks in the mud. They were large hoof prints, bigger than any deer she had ever seen. She knelt down to examine them more closely. The tracks were deep, suggesting a massive animal had passed through recently. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way. The rain had weakened the soil near the edge of the ravine. Sarah screamed as she tumbled backward into the darkness. Her body crashed through branches and bushes. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but everything slipped through her fingers. When the falling stopped, Sarah found herself in a terrifying position. Her left foot was caught between two thick tree roots that grew from the ravine wall. She was hanging completely upside down, about 15 feet above the rocky bottom. Her backpack had fallen off during the tumble and lay shattered on the rocks. Below, pain shot through her ankle as the roots gripped it tighter. Blood rushed to her head, making everything spin. Sarah tried to reach up to free her foot, but she couldn't bend her body enough. The roots were too high, and gravity worked against her. She called for help, but her voice echoed uselessly in the empty ravine. No one knew exactly where she was. She had told the station she would be checking the northern fence, but that covered miles of territory. It could be days before anyone found her. The sky grew darker as the clouds thickened. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. She was trapped, alone, and running out of time. Her radio had been in her backpack. Her phone had no signal this deep in the forest, even when she checked earlier. Hours passed slowly. Sarah's head pounded from hanging upside down. She tried to stay calm and conserve her energy, but fear gnawed at her mind. How long could a person survive like this? Would anyone find her before it was too late? As afternoon faded into evening, Sarah heard something moving above the ravine. The sound of heavy footsteps made Sarah's heart race. Whatever was moving above her was big, very big. She held her breath, hoping it wasn't a bear. Bears sometimes wandered through this part of the forest, especially in autumn. Through her blurred vision, Sarah saw a huge shadow appear at the edge of the ravine. It was a horse. But not just any horse. This animal was enormous, standing at least 18 hands high. Its coat was dark brown, almost black, and its muscles rippled beneath its skin. The horse had no saddle, no bridle, nothing to suggest it belonged to anyone. The horse stopped at the edge and looked down at her. Sarah noticed something strange in its eyes. They seemed intelligent, almost human-like in their awareness. The animal didn't seem startled or afraid. Instead, it studied her carefully, as if understanding her situation. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice came out weak and raspy. "Help," she whispered. Knowing how foolish it sounded to ask a horse for help, the horse snorted and tossed its massive head. Then it did something unexpected. It began walking along the edge of the ravine, looking for a way down. Sarah watched in amazement as the animal carefully tested different paths with its hooves. Most horses would have run away from such a situation, but this one seemed determined to reach her. After several minutes, the horse found a slope on the far side of the ravine that was gentle enough to descend. It moved slowly and carefully, placing each hoof with precision. When the horse reached the bottom of the ravine, it walked directly beneath Sarah. It stood completely still, as if waiting for something. Sarah realized what the horse was trying to do. If she could somehow free her foot, she might be able to drop onto the horse's back instead of crashing onto the rocks. But her ankle was wedged too tightly between the roots. She pulled and twisted, ignoring the sharp pain that shot up her leg. The roots wouldn't budge. Tears of frustration rolled down her forehead and into her hair. The horse made a low rumbling sound in its chest. It stepped closer, pressing its broad back directly under her suspended body. Sarah reached down and managed to touch the horse's mane with her fingertips. The animal's warmth gave her a spark of hope. Then the horse did something remarkable. It began to rise up on its hind legs slightly, stretching its neck upward. Sarah grabbed onto the thick mane with both hands. The horse was trying to give her something to hold on to while she freed herself. With the horse supporting some of her weight through its mane, Sarah had better leverage. She twisted her trapped foot with all her remaining strength. The pain was incredible, but she didn't stop. She had to get free. This was her only chance. Sarah pulled harder on the horse's mane while twisting her ankle. Suddenly, her boot slipped free from the roots. She dropped onto the horse's back with a heavy thud. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. But she managed to hold on. The massive horse stood steady beneath her weight, not moving until she had firmly gripped its mane with both hands. Once the horse felt her secure, it began walking slowly toward the gentle slope it had used to descend into the ravine. Sarah lay across the horse's back, barely able to keep herself upright. Her head still throbbed from hanging upside down for hours. Her ankles screamed with pain, but she was alive, and she was no longer trapped. The climb up the slope was slow and careful. The horse placed each hoof deliberately, making sure not to slip on the loose soil. Sarah felt the powerful muscles moving beneath her, carrying her to safety. She had never experienced anything like this before. When they reached the top of the ravine, the horse paused. It seemed to be deciding which direction to go. Sarah tried to guide it toward the ranger station, but she was too weak to do more than hold on. Her body was giving out after the trauma of the fall and the hours of being trapped. The horse made its own decision. It began walking through the forest with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. The animal moved with surprising grace for its size, avoiding low branches and rough terrain. As darkness fell completely, Sarah started to lose consciousness. The pain, exhaustion, and shock were too much. She slumped forward against the horse's neck, her hands still tangled in its mane. The last thing she remembered was the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves on the forest floor. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she saw lights. Bright lights that hurt after so many hours in the darkness. Voices surrounded her, urgent and concerned. She was lying on something soft. A stretcher, she realized. "She's waking up," someone said. It was Tom Chen, another ranger from her station. "Sarah, can you hear me?" asked a paramedic, shining a small flashlight in her eyes. She tried to speak but managed only a weak nod. Everything hurt, especially her ankle. "You're going to be okay," the paramedic assured her. "We're taking you to the hospital now." As they loaded her into the ambulance, Sarah looked around frantically. "The horse," she croaked. "Where's the horse?" Tom leaned into the ambulance, his face confused. "What horse, Sarah?" "We found you lying in the middle of the fire road, about 2 miles from the station. There was no horse. We thought you had crawled there yourself, but that seemed impossible given your injuries." Sarah's mind raced. That couldn't be right. The horse had carried her. She remembered its warmth, its strength, the way it had rescued her from the ravine. "Big horse," she insisted. "Dark brown, huge, it saved me." Tom exchanged worried glances with the paramedic. They clearly thought Sarah was confused from her injuries. "Just rest now," Tom said gently. "We can talk about everything later." The ambulance doors closed, and Sarah felt herself being carried away. But she knew what she had experienced was real. The horse had saved her life. Where had it gone? At the hospital, doctors treated her injuries. Her ankle was badly sprained but not broken. She had severe bruising, a mild concussion, and dehydration. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. Hanging upside down for several hours could have caused serious complications or even death. Sarah's supervisor, Chief Ranger Martinez, visited her the next morning. He sat beside her hospital bed with a concerned expression. "Sarah, we need to understand what happened. Tom said you kept talking about a horse." Sarah told him everything. The fall, being trapped upside down, and the massive horse that had rescued her. Martinez listened carefully, not interrupting once. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, we searched that entire area. There were no horse tracks anywhere. The only tracks we found were yours, leading from the ravine to where we found you on the fire road." "That's impossible," Sarah protested. "I couldn't have walked. I could barely hold on to the horse's mane." Martinez pulled out his phone and showed her photos from the search. The pictures clearly showed her boot prints in the mud, a trail leading from the ravine area to the fire road. But there were no hoof prints. Not a single one. Sarah felt her certainty wavering. Had she imagined it all? Was it a hallucination brought on by trauma and oxygen deprivation? But it had felt so real. She could still remember the texture of the horse's mane, the warmth of its body, the steady rhythm of its walk. "Get some rest," Martinez said, patting her hand. "Head injuries can cause confusion. The important thing is, you're safe now." After he left, Sarah lay in the hospital bed, feeling frustrated and confused. She knew what she had experienced. The horse had been real, but how could she prove it? 2 days later, Sarah was released from the hospital. Her sister drove her home and helped her settle in. Sarah spent the next week recovering on her couch, her injured ankle propped up on pillows. She couldn't stop thinking about the horse. During her recovery, she searched online for any reports of wild horses in Blackwood Forest. There were none. The forest had never been home to wild horse populations. She called every stable and ranch within 50 miles, asking if anyone was missing a large dark horse. Every answer was no. She posted on social media, describing the horse and asking if anyone had seen it. No responses. 3 weeks later, Sarah returned to work on light duty. She couldn't do field work yet, so she spent her days in the office, filing reports and answering phones. It was boring, but it gave her time to think. One afternoon, an elderly woman walked into the ranger station. She had white hair pulled back in a neat bun and bright blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She asked to speak with Sarah specifically. "My name is Margaret Holloway," the woman said, sitting across from Sarah's desk. "I heard about your accident." "And about the horse." Sarah's attention sharpened. "You know about the horse?" Margaret nodded slowly. "My family has lived near these woods for 5 generations. My grandmother told me stories, and her grandmother told her. There's something you should know about Blackwood Forest." Sarah leaned forward, ignoring the ache in her ankle. "About 150 years ago," Margaret continued, "a logging company owned this land. They used horses to haul timber out of the forest. One horse, a massive draft horse named Titan, was the strongest of them all. He could pull loads that 3 normal horses couldn't move." Margaret paused, looking out the window at the forest beyond. Titan's owner was a cruel man. He worked the horse until it collapsed. When Titan couldn't work anymore, the man led him deep into the forest and shot him rather than let him rest in peace. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "But here's where the story gets interesting," Margaret said. "Over the years, dozens of people have reported being saved by a huge dark horse in these woods. Hunters who got lost, hikers who fell and injured themselves, even a child who wandered away from a campsite. The horse always appears when someone is in desperate trouble, helps them to safety, and then vanishes without a trace." "You're saying I was saved by a ghost horse?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the skepticism from her voice. Margaret smiled. "I'm saying that sometimes the forest takes care of its own. Whether you call it a ghost, a spirit, or just an unexplained phenomenon, something saved you that day. And you're not the first." After Margaret left, Sarah sat in silence. The story sounded impossible, but so did a massive horse appearing from nowhere, rescuing her, and disappearing without leaving tracks. That evening, Sarah drove to the forest entrance. Her ankle was healing well enough for short walks now. She took a flashlight and a warm jacket and headed toward the ravine where she had fallen. The forest was quiet and dark. Sarah walked carefully, using her flashlight to guide her steps. When she reached the ravine, she stood at the edge and looked down at the spot where she had been trapped. "Thank you," she said softly into the darkness. "I don't know if you can hear me or if you even exist, but thank you for saving my life." The forest remained silent. No mysterious horse appeared. Sarah felt a little foolish talking to the trees. She turned to walk back to her truck. Then she heard it. A low rumbling sound, like a horse's nicker, coming from somewhere deep in the forest. Sarah spun around, her heart pounding. She saw nothing but trees and shadows. Sarah stood frozen, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Through the trees, she caught a glimpse of something large moving in the shadows. Then it was gone. A smile spread across Sarah's face. She didn't need proof for anyone else. She knew the truth. The horse was real, in whatever form it existed. Over the following months, Sarah returned to full duty as a ranger. She told no one else about Margaret's visit or the sound she had heard in the forest that night. Some experiences were meant to be private, but she began noticing things she had never paid attention to before. Other rangers occasionally mentioned strange occurrences in the forest. A hiker who swore a large animal had guided him back to the trail when he was lost. A couple whose car had broken down on a remote road, who said they followed horse sounds until they found help. Sarah started documenting these stories quietly. She kept a journal where she recorded every account she heard. The pattern was clear. Whenever someone was in serious danger in Blackwood Forest, help arrived in unexpected ways. One spring morning, almost a year after her accident, Sarah was leading a group of junior rangers on a training hike. She was teaching them about forest safety and emergency procedures. They stopped near the ravine where she had fallen. "This is where I learned the most important lesson about this forest," Sarah told the young rangers. "Never assume you're alone out here, and never give up hope, even in the worst situations." She didn't tell them about the horse. They wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe someday, if one of them found themselves in desperate need, they would have their own encounter, and then they would know. As the group moved on, Sarah glanced back at the ravine one last time. In the shadows between the trees, she thought she saw a large shape watching them. Dark brown, massive, powerful. But when she blinked, it was gone. Sarah touched the scar on her ankle, permanent reminder of that terrible day and the miracle that followed. She had entered the forest that morning as a skeptic who believed only in what she could see and touch. She had emerged believing in something greater. The forest held mysteries that science couldn't explain, and one of those mysteries had saved her life. Years later, when Sarah became chief ranger herself, she made sure every new ranger heard the unofficial history of Blackwood Forest. She told them about the old logging days, about the horses that worked until they dropped, and about the legends that persisted through generations. She never said whether she believed the stories were true, but she always ended with the same advice: respect the forest. It remembers everything, and sometimes, when you need it most, it remembers you too. On quiet nights, when Sarah worked late at the ranger station, she sometimes walked outside and looked toward the dark line of trees. Once in a while, she heard that familiar sound, a low, rumbling nicker carried on the wind, and she smiled, knowing that Titan still watched over those who needed him. The massive horse had discovered her, trapped and upside down when no one else could find her. Her fate could have been death, alone in that ravine. But instead, she had been given a second chance at life, and a story that would stay with her forever. A story of impossible rescue, of mysteries beyond understanding, and of a debt she could never repay to a guardian she could barely prove existed.